Okay, so let's go through the process of getting a Cloud9 workspace set up with MySQL and Sequelize. So if you go to the Cloud9 website, you can sign in, and I'm going to sign in with GitHub. So you want to make sure you have a GitHub account, first of all, because this makes it easy to synchronize the repositories you have on GitHub with a Cloud9 workspace. So I'm going to click this little icon here at the bottom, which is the GitHub icon. So that will automatically log you in and take you to the dashboard where you can see different projects that you're working on. Now, what exactly is this Cloud9 workspace? Well, it basically is a built-in or a computer that is running in your web browser. So for each workspace you have, Cloud9 sets up a virtual computer that is running on their servers. And it creates an interface and a connection to your browser so that what you see in your browser is the visual representation of your workspace computer that lives on the Cloud9 servers. This allows for you to have a consistent workspace. So you can set up a different type of environment, but it's going to be the same every time. So you don't have to worry about having a different type of computer, different operating systems, different platforms. It's going to provide for consistency, and it's going to provide for separation. So each workspace you have is totally separate. It's not going to be interfered with by other people or other projects that you have going. Everything's completely self-contained, so that ensures stability. So you can create a workspace you can just create one on the fly, or you can create one workspace that represents one of your GitHub repositories, which I think is a good idea. So that's what I would do. So over on the left-hand side, I'm going to choose repositories. And in my GitHub account, I had already set up a Sequelize example. And I'm going to click on Clone to Edit. And then I'm just going to put in the same workspace name as the repository. And I'm going to choose to run on Node.js. That is the target of Sequelize, or the targeted platform. And let's see, I'm going to, they require, just like GitHub, everything has to be lowercase. Or not GitHub, just like NPM, everything has to be lowercase. So let me create that workspace. And I'll fast forward this. Okay, so after the installation is complete and it basically builds a separate computer for you on their servers, you'll immediately go to your Workspace Interface, and you're going to notice that it kind of looks like a text editor or an IDE. And this is the confines of where you can work. So it's not like a complete computer where you can just do whatever you could normally do on any operating system. It's contained within the development environment. So you can see it has the normal things such as the file explorer and the main workspace. Then at the bottom, it also has a command prompt for your workspace. And it also has a immediate window. Since we're doing Node, this is going to be a kind of like a debugger where you can actually type in any JavaScript you want, and it will work as normal. So what we're trying to do here is work with MySQL. So MySQL is part of Cloud9 by default. It is built in, and it's not turned on. You just simply have to turn it on. So how do you do that? Everything that you are going to want to work with in the command line is going to be just like normal. So there's a built-in command called MySQL CTL, and this command takes the parameter start, and it's going to basically install uh, a MySQL database um, by default. And so you can see through the logging that it created a MySQL database named C9, and with the root user is your username that you logged in with. And you'll use this to connect to the database instance from your JavaScript code. Okay, so that is pretty easy. So what do we do next? So if we type in MySQL CTL status, we can see MySQL is running. Okay, so we just have this database running, and we need to interact with it. So one of the first concepts to understand is that JavaScript can't just talk to MySQL on its own. It has to have something in between it to translate between MySQL and JavaScript. They don't know how to talk to each other naturally. So there has to be an intermediary. And luckily, this thing has already been created for you. So as with all Node apps, we are going to do an Npm install, because the command line here is just like any other command line. The npm command is going to exist, and we're going to install MySQL. Now, it says MySQL. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We need to start off that we are creating a Node application. We have to do a npm init first to get everything started. Just take the default, enter for everything. Everything looks good. Okay, now we'll do npm install save MySQL. Now, this isn't actually installing MySQL. It's installing the bridge, the translation, the tool that translates from MySQL to JavaScript and vice versa. And that's fine. So what we need to do now is install Sequelize, because that is the tool, another tool we're going to use to make it even easier to talk to MySQL. So what is Sequelize going to do? Well, it's going to abstract away the MySQL language. So in order to talk to MySQL, you need to use another language, a query language. And we may not want to do that because we're in JavaScript, we're working with JavaScript, and that's what we want to stick with. We don't want to have to deal with another language. So we're going to add another tool, Sequelize, which is going to abstract away the MySQL language and allow us to write code purely in JavaScript. So let's install that. And looks like it installed successfully. So if you look at our node modules, as usual, you can see the two folders of what we've installed, MySQL and Sequelize. Okay, and now we need to start using it. So the first thing we can do is we can use a tool that lets us set up the database. So right now we have a blank database. There's no tables in it. There's no data in it. We need to define the tables we want to use. Now we could go to the MySQL command line and we could manually type out all of the queries, the statements in MySQL that would make the tables we want. But again, we don't want to do this. We want to be able to create everything we need only in JavaScript. So we're going to use Sequelize to do that. So how do we do that? Well, there is another tool that can be used to administer the MySQL database, and that is the Sequelize command line interface. So this is another npm package we can install, and it's just Sequelize-CLI for command line interface. And this is going to install a tool that will allow us to type in the command line things to set up the files that we need to create our database. So let me fast forward here. Okay, after it installs, now there's going to be a Sequelize command, just like anything else. And if you type in Sequelize and a help menu comes up, then that means it's installed properly. And what we want to do is we want to initialize a project. So we are going to do, similar to npm, we're going to do a Sequelize init. This is going to create a couple of files for us, a couple of directories as a starting point for how we are going to create our database. So as you can see, some folders appeared. We've got a config file. This is going to contain information relevant to your database. You need to connect using a username, password, database, host, and there's a different entry for different environments. Migrations are a record of how you changed your database structure over time. It allows you to revert back to previous database schemas in case you change something and it made the application break. You can revert back to a previous version of it. Models are going to be a representation of your tables. And then seeders is going to be a representation of data that you want to put in your tables right away. And so what we have is if we look at this index.js file, you can see that we are, this is created by Sequelize, and it's going to, this is the entry point for creating your database tables. So it's basically going to look at all the models you've created and then create a table for each one of the models. Okay, so now that we've initialized things, how do we actually make one single table, for example? So let's see how we do that. Okay, so to create tables, we have to create what Sequelize terms a model. So a model is the code that defines what the table should look like. So don't get confused by the terminology. It's just the model is what you're describing in JavaScript, which then will ultimately create a table in MySQL. So when we're in the command line, I'm just going to paste a command in here. We're going to do a Sequelize model create. This is going to create a model. Each model has to have a name, so you do a -- name space whatever the name is of your model. So for instance, if you're creating a user table, call it user. Attributes are going to be the same as table columns. So if they're going to create attributes in a JavaScript object, which will ultimately map to table columns. So you'll follow the syntax of -- attributes space attribute name. First name is the attribute name, and colon the type of attribute it is. So it could be a string, or it could be a number. There's several different data types. We'll look at those later. So if I hit enter, the command line is going to run and create an actual physical file. And you can see it show up in the models directory. And if we open that file, you'll see some code in which this is specific to Sequelize. It created this code because it needs it to look this way in order for it to understand what you're trying to describe to it. So you can see here is the name of user, which we specified, and you can see all the attributes that we put into the command line are in here. And then there's some other stuff that's specific to some other things in Sequelize we don't need to look at right now. But you now have a JavaScript file defining what you want your MySQL table to look like. Okay, so this file just existing didn't actually make the actual table in MySQL. There's no table generated yet. Now that we created a model, we now have to run the command to use this file to generate the table. So how do we do that? Okay, so before you actually create the tables in MySQL, we need to set up our config file, because now that we are going to make JavaScript talk to MySQL and tell it to create tables. And JavaScript won't know where MySQL is unless we tell it where it is. And doing that through Sequelize, you do it in this config.json file. So if we open this file, we see our development environment. So we're in development now, and we're going to, so this is where we're going to put the information. We have our username, which is just going to be your Cloud9 username. There's no password because nobody else can access this database except for you, and you've already logged into Cloud9, so that's fine. The database is called C9 because that's just the default name that Cloud9 gave it. You can't change it. Maybe you can, I'm not sure, but we'll leave it like that for now. And the host is just going to be localhost. That has to be the name of your computer or your cloud server, your Cloud9 workspace. And localhost just refers to itself. It could also be 127.0.0.1. Well, let's put it at localhost for now. And then the dialect is what language is it speaking. And we're using MySQL, so it's MySQL. So make sure to have the config file set up properly. Then if we go back to the command line, we can use a Sequelize command that will say, take all of the files that are representing a model and change that into a table. And that command is the Sequelize db migrate. So if we run that, okay, so I've already run it, so it says nothing was executed, but when you run it, it will actually do something. So now we can't actually visualize it, that there's actually a table there, but we can try to access it to see whether our users table was actually physically made in the database. So we can go to our MySQL command line, CLI. This will open a new command line in which you can run MySQL commands directly. You may not want to do this if you don't want to start getting into MySQL syntax, but we'll just do a little simple thing here just to prove that it worked. So first we want to use the database that we have, and that is C9. And then we do a simple select statement. and MySQL is case sensitive, and you have to terminate with a colon, and we'll see empty set 0 seconds. So this is the results we got from selecting everything from the table. Now, obviously, we didn't, there's nothing in the table because we just made it, and it's empty, so we got nothing. But this shows you that the table actually exists. If it didn't exist, it would have thrown an error, and you wouldn't have seen this empty set message right here. So that is how you create your entities or your models in the MySQL through Sequelizer. So you just have to go through the process of creating the models through the command line for each one that you want, and just keep repeating this process for each new model, and then running the db migration command in order to actually have them be physically created in the database. Okay, next we will want to actually use the information and either put things into the database or retrieve them back out of the database. So we'll look at that next.